Hello, I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar. Welcome to Superhero University on Batgirl of Burnside. Session number 3. One Batgirl Too Many. Have a seat. Class is now in session. Hello, and welcome to Superhero University on Batgirl of Burnside, session number 3, One Batgirl Too Many. I am your superhero scholar, Joshua Unruh, and I'm excited to dive into this third issue of Batgirl of Burnside. It is issue number 37. We've got the same creative team going forward. It is Cameron Stewart and Brendan Fletcher sharing the writing duties, with Cameron Stewart and Babs Tarr sharing the interiors. Babs Tarr, again, is doing most of the art, but she definitely attributes a lot of the visual signifiers that she uses throughout the book to Cameron Stewart. This is the third of 6 parts, so we are kind of hitting that middle space of the story where things are starting to pick up the pace a little bit. All of the plots that are going to happen are starting to really ramp up. We have a mystery getting deeper while another mystery gets solved. We ask some really fascinating questions about identity and about what it is to be who you are. What is it about Barbara that is Barbara? What is Batgirl? What do these two things mean? What would it mean for someone to usurp her identity as Batgirl? What would that look like? And why would someone do something like that? So that's the kind of stuff that we're diving into in this particular episode. Just an aside for those of you who are entertained by such things, I wanted to tell you where I pulled the title for this seminar from. There is an issue of Batman, and I will put a link to its entry in the show notes. And it is one that made a huge impression on me as a kid. And fascinatingly, it's the issue that came out before they started Batman Year One, which is this sort of seminal Batman origin story by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. I spoke about it actually on lovely patron Mandy Kay's excellent podcast, Pop Culturally Deprived. It was one of the things that made me think a superhero university would work, was me walking her through that book, why people made the creative choices that they made on it. This issue of Batman made a huge impression on me as a kid, I think mostly because I happened to own it. When I was a kid, I reread individual issues constantly, and this one was really fascinating to me for reasons that I would have had difficulty explaining at the time, but now I definitely think tie into why I enjoy this arc on Batgirl so much. And the basic premise of this issue of Batman is that there is a cop, and he had actually made an appearance in another issue. His name is Tommy, and he is convinced that he's Batman. He's just convinced of it. And at the end of this previous story, which I have actually never read, Batman catches him and puts him in Arkham. This issue that made such an impression on me actually begins on the very first page with Batman in this weird kaleidoscope background. It's a full-page deal, and he has Joker apparently dead in one hand, and he is kicking Two-Face to death with his off foot. It's this really striking image, and it's called One Batman Too Many. Just says it right there on the cover. And when you turn the next page, you get a panel that's very similar to the layout of that first page, and it has this guy in like an Arkham inmate outfit, and there's 2 guards, one that he's holding by the collar, who is clearly not alive, and one that he is kicking in the face. And you realize that's not Batman. This is inside Tommy's mind. And I'm not going to draw them out a lot because it's really only interesting to me because I read One Batman Too Many so many times. But there are actually beats in that book that occur again or similarly in One Batgirl Too Many. There's this point where Batman goes to speak to Tommy's ex-partner on the Gotham City Police Department, where he steps out of the shadows and scares the guy to death. And the guy goes, "Tommy?" And it's just kind of similar. It's just kind of reminiscent to me of later in this issue when Batgirl steps out and scares the gallery owner. Then there's a moment where Batman confronts Tommy and gets across that things are maybe more confusing than Tommy realizes. And he basically gets the guy to realize maybe I'm not Batman, but I feel like I'm Batman. And it's a very heartfelt and emotional ending to what could have just been Batman beating up on this guy who idolizes the Dark Knight detective. And what I like about that as contrast to the end of One Batgirl Too Many is that there is no self-delusion, or at least there's not such an obvious self-delusion in Barbara's doppelganger. This is somebody who is trying to supplant her as Batgirl, but is very knowingly doing so. And you get a lot less heart. That's fine, because I don't always necessarily turn to a Bat book for heart, but it's just kind of interesting to see this terrifying Bat monster hunter of men turn around and kind of end the book putting his arm around that issue's antagonist, versus here we have Batgirl, who might on the surface be the more warm and fuzzy Bat family member, really just taking her doppelganger to task. It's just a fascinating compare and contrast, and I will, again, in the show notes, make the information on that issue available. And if you guys are interested in that, maybe I can find a digital copy or something, and we can talk more about it after you've all read it. But that's where I got the title, One Batgirl Too Many, from this random issue of Batman that I read forever ago. I can even still tell you what the picture is Tommy, close up on the cover, and he's holding Batman's cowl and stretching it out. It stuck with me. And then the next issue is Batman Year One, which is this incredible work that everybody's heard of, but nobody but me cares about the issue that came out before that. I couldn't not make a nod in that direction. Jumping into Batgirl of Burnside Part 3, we'll do a quick recap because there's not really that much. We are just going right into it headlong. At this point, our entire supporting cast is in full effect. We have Frankie and Dinah at home, Nadima, Jeremy, and Kadir at work. So Barbara has one permanent roommate in Frankie that they are longtime close friends as civilians. She does not know that Barbara is Batgirl. She has Dinah, who is also the Black Canary, and is sleeping on her couch because Barbara may or may not have burned down her apartment. Dinah and Barbara have been longtime superhero friends, partners. So Dinah is fully aware of Barbara's double life. And that's a very strange situation because Dinah really doesn't like Barbara very much right now, and that tension is showing in Barbara's relationship with Frankie. You may recall Dinah wound up sleeping on Barbara's couch about 10 minutes after Barbara had moved in with Frankie. So it's complicated all the way around. So then we also have our supporting cast at work in full effect. Nadima, the research assistant, Jeremy, the professor that's cute but too old for them, and Kadir, who is Nadima's brother and has become Batgirl's gearhead. Our Somebody Knows My Secret plot has thickened into Someone Knows All My Secrets, because not only are they attacking Batgirl, but they are attacking Batgirl with things about Barbara Gordon. In our last issue, the Jawbreakers were based on characters from a cartoon show that scared Barbara when she was 7 years old. And the Jawbreakers were employed by someone calling themselves Batgirl, telling them, the Jawbreakers, to go after Batgirl as characters that terrify Barbara. It's a weird group of secrets that are all bundled into one another, but what it means is somebody knows all of Barbara's secrets, and they are coming for her. Barbara's academic woes are also in full swing, but there is a glimmer of hope she'll be able to sort them out before talking to her advisor. We'll talk a little bit more about that in this issue. So moving into the beat breakdown, we open on Batgirl assisting with a robbery. She apparently has henchwomen, because the women she's in the car with are dressed in sort of a mix of Batgirl costume and evening wear. You'll note that there is a music player with yet another fake song. Again, I've done the research for you, it's fake, but one that seems like it would be appropriate to this moment. Batgirl and her gang are in the back of this car, and they take a moment to take a selfie. And I find it fascinating that we're involving what I kind of call selfie culture. I'm not the one who coined that phrase. There's been a lot of talk about selfie culture and what that means to the people, especially young girls, who have so bought into selfie culture. We'll come back to that. We will talk more about that as we go because it's germane to this issue. But I'm actually a big fan of the selfie culture, and we'll talk about why as we go. But in this moment, Batgirl and one of these henchwomen take a selfie, Batgirl declares it kawaii and then demands that it get posted or shared. This is really fascinating, again, on a variety of levels, because we're going to have that identity control and selfie culture come up and down throughout this story. This is especially brought to the fore with social media. And here we have villains, not great villains, but, someone to keep Batgirl busy, using social media check-ins to plan their robberies. When they see a famous person check in someplace, they know that famous person isn't at home, and they go rob that famous person. That is a very interesting way to use technology in general, but social media specifically, to elevate yourselves to the point of bat villains, even if you're second or third string or fourth string. You're down the rope a little bit. Now, what's fascinating to me here is these Batgirls apparently tagged Batgirl in hopes that she'd come and stop them, and instead she wound up helping them. That brings us back to our topic from last issue, that cult of fame. Here you have people willing to do completely outlandish, ridiculous, dangerous, illegal things in order to become internet famous. Or famous at all, but even we'll just take a little bit of social media fame. And here you had people not only doing a pretty clever idea of using social media to plan the robberies, but then they document themselves committing the crimes, which is always the hallmark of a genius criminal. But then you also have them tagging the superhero as if daring her to come get them, because you know what? If you get caught robbing someplace, you're just thieves. But if you get caught by Batgirl robbing somebody, hey, you're going to get some news media play, huh? What do you think of that? So, quick question, be honest. Who was fooled by the blinged out Batgirl? Anybody? Were you at least confused? I will tell you that when I was reading this in the individual issues as it came out monthly, I was at least taken aback. We have seen how different this Barbara is from the Barbara that I was used to. And while I didn't think that she would assist people in a jewel theft, it did have me wondering about who this Batgirl was. Was it Barbara in a plan? Was it Barbara gone bad? What's with the blinged out outfit? It looks pretty great. I mean, if you're a member of the Bat family, you probably don't want to have a uniform covered in rhinestones. But you have to admit, if that's what you're going to do, this is a pretty good version of Babs's new outfit, tricked out for evening wear, if that is such a thing. Babstar does an amazing job of giving this Batgirl a different facial structure. It's recognizably Batgirl, but also, if you've been reading for the last couple of issues and paying attention, the jawline is different, right? The shape of the head is slightly different. It's very interesting. And like I said, the bling doesn't seem very Barbara, but the costume itself is very on point. It's very convincing, although, note the mirror image thigh pouch. The thigh pouch is on the other side, as though it were a mirror image of Batgirl. That's a little bit of a clue, I feel. So we get some very predictable rebellious youth stuff going on against the older denizens of Burnside. I think it's kind of ironic that this Batgirl yells, "God, normal people are so boring," when she literally could not be more basic, at least in as much as supervillainy goes. You're a jewel thief wearing the sexy Batgirl Halloween costume version of Batgirl's outfit. This is not exactly trend-setting stuff. But there she is, the most basic supervillainess of all time, insisting that normal people are boring. A Bat gadget comes out of nowhere and stops the car dead, and the real Batgirl swings in to snag the faker. The Batgirls think they've been stood up. I think this is kind of fascinating. They are extremely self-centered. They're almost a parody of the good parts of selfie culture. And so now that I've made it clear that I feel there are good sides and bad sides, or at least a parody of the good parts of selfie culture, let's take a little digression to talk about it. I am not a psychologist. I am not an anthropologist. I am not going to go 10 miles deep into this subject. But I will say that I have had my eyes opened as far as selfie culture goes, especially for young ladies. One thing that was pointed out to me that I found very eye-opening is that most pictures, especially when they were like painted portraits or works of art, are pictures of young women, but they are pictures of young women through the lens of the male artist. They serve the male gaze. The fascinating thing about selfie culture, and the empowering thing about selfie culture, is that when you take a selfie, that is how you want to be seen. You are only making it available after you have picked out the picture of you that is the way you want to present yourself. Is there a space where that could become extremely self-centered, or you could become very focused on just your appearance? Is there a space where that could get damaging or dangerous? Absolutely. Any good thing taken to an extreme can become destructive. Good, bad, or indifferent. Even something like exercise. Even something like eating only certain very healthy things, right? Like there's a point where you can do damage to yourself psychologically or physically by doing a good thing too far. Similarly, there's probably a place where spending hours and hours and hours just getting that perfect selfie might wind up not being the best thing for every single girl that makes that effort. However, the idea of taking back control of the way you present yourself out into the world through the power of selfies, I think is incredibly empowering. Anyone who wants to dismiss selfie culture as self-indulgent, that's definitely a thing they should take into account. And realize how rarely in our history of photography or art or anything that young women have been able to control the way that they are portrayed. It's a rare occurrence. And yet here they are saying, I don't care if you think I look good, I think I look good. Or taking the picture and saying, here I am, proud of the way that I look, proud of the way that I feel today. That's a big deal. However, as I said, these Batgirls might be almost a parody of that. Here they are on a jewel heist with who they think is the real Batgirl. And when all of a sudden their car stops and who they think is the real Batgirl is gone, they immediately assume that they've been stood up. It's immediately all about them. And obviously, if you wanted to, in just a panel or two, show the dangers of selfie culture, even as the rest of the issue is going to talk about the empowering nature of it, Batgirls are pretty good as examples of that. Barbara, as Batgirl, faces off against the Faker to protect her rep. And the Faker says, you're ruining it. And this is the first of several times that the fake Batgirl says something that has a double meaning. What exactly is she ruining? On the surface, the most obvious thing that Batgirl, the real Batgirl, Barbara Gordon as Batgirl, is ruining is the Faker's night on the town, right? This jewel heist that she decided to get a part of. On the surface, that is the most obvious thing that Batgirl is ruining for the Faker. But as we will come to realize, there are multiple things going on with this Faker and multiple things going on with the way the Faker sees her own identity. Where you're ruining it might not only be this jewel heist or this night out, but the real Batgirl, according to the Faker, might be ruining the entire concept of the identity that is Batgirl. The Faker is not as physically adept as Batgirl. It looks like she's going to lose when the Batgirls help out with a Molotov cocktail, giving the Faker just enough opportunity to escape. The real Batgirl is annoyed and is going to make darn sure that she takes in the Batgirls. We get a photo of the Batgirls all tied up, which I think is a pretty slick transition to our next scene in Kadir's lab. Here we're going to establish even further that Kadir is Batgirl's gearhead, but he's also going to submit himself as a Batgirl fan, and B, as a guy who has opinions about the way Batgirl should manage her identity. There's a place where this could look very mansplainy, but I don't think Kadir ever falls into that. He is just saying, this is a thing I would like to see. You seem confused by this situation. Let me tell you the way I see it, and then you can make your own choices. It starts from a place of confusion. Batgirl is just confused by the Batgirls and the way that they almost wanted to be caught. Barbara actually says, they wanted my attention. They asked for my autograph as I was tying them up. And in the meantime, of course, we realize, at least as far as Barbara is concerned, Faker is trying to ruin her reputation. So you have this kind of cult of fame, oh, we can't believe we're being caught by Batgirl, coming hot on the heels of a fake Batgirl trying to usurp the position. Now, Kadir is in favor of Batgirl having some kind of social media strategy. He doesn't put it that way, but he says, maybe you're the one who should be taking the pictures of yourself while you're taking down the bad guys. Why don't you own it? Get in front of the camera. I'd like to see that. We've established Kadir as kind of a Batgirl fanboy, so I read that as a very helpful, friendly piece of advice, but I suppose there's a space where you could read it as prurient or him being too into the way that Batgirl presents herself. I don't read it that way, but I think that there's a possibility of reading it that way if you wanted. Kadir is then further reestablished as the gearhead for Barbara when they talk about the EMP bomb, and he shows her the Bat cellular phone with a super flash. I love that there's a Bat phone, a Bat celly, and the super flash is a really clever, modern, smartphone take on the flashbang. And this scene with Kadir and the super flash borrow a James Bond trope, where you see Q, Kadir, coincidence? Perhaps not, but you see Q giving new gadgets to James Bond at the beginning of the movie, and then by the end of the movie, James Bond has used all of them to one extent or another to save his bacon or save somebody else. All of the gadgets that Q introduces at the beginning of James Bond movies are used by the end of James Bond movies. And here we are with this Bat cell phone and a super flash introduced, and you wonder, how's she going to use that? And then, of course, it becomes the instrument by which Barbara wins the day. So Kadir says that all of Burnside is Batgirl crazy and uses a new art gallery opening as a way to introduce that fact and then back it up with the work of an artist called Dagger Type. Props to lovely patron Ethan, who brings up a point that I also wondered with Dagger Type. As a photographic artist, I wonder if his name is sort of a play on daguerreotype. He's obviously kind of a Banksy type character who does these stunts or these big outdoor guerrilla art pieces. And to incorporate photography, you might get daguerreotype. For those of you who don't know, daguerreotype is what you think of when you think of old-timey photographs. It was actually a photographic process that involved mercury vapor onto a thin sheet of metal, copper or tin, which is a lot of times why they get that kind of tarnished color, is because they're actually on metal. I don't know that there is a bigger tie-in than just that is photography and that this opening is photography, but those two things made me think of one another. Good call, Ethan. Once again, bringing up technology and social media and the way that all of these things interact with one another in our everyday lives, I really appreciated the use of texting, both as a scene transition and then to find each other in the gallery. It let there be a second level of commentary on whatever they were looking at or what was going on, while also filling in some of the blanks for us about this gallery opening. And all in a very true-to-life way using the power of texting. I really appreciate it. As the ladies, Dinah, Barbara, Alacia, and Frankie walk up to the gallery, note the dresses. Just like the last session, I'm not going to dive deep into the fashion, but I am going to point out how much work Babs Tarr puts in to making these ladies look good. They look like young people who are going out for the night. They could have stepped off of multiple fashion plates to take up residence in this panel. And you'll also note the facial expressions are all different as they walk up. We are being told things about their personal style and about their emotional state right there in that moment just from the look of them. And I think it's great. So once again, Tarr kills it. I want to point out that Frankie's muscular dystrophy is front and center. Disability or the lack of mobility is spotlighted here, and for good reason. We're going to turn the page and we're going to see an immediate in this story good reason, but there's also a meta excuse. Remember from our first session, we talked about how a lot of people were very upset at the idea that they were losing a disabled superhero as visible as Oracle, as Barbara Gordon as Oracle. I don't want to give away too much of what it will eventually happen with Frankie, but just keeping disability or a lack of mobility front and center in a Batgirl comic is wise. Not just for the story beat that we're going to have here, but also because it is a huge part of her backstory. And even if she has more or less overcome that disability now in the new continuity, making sure that it is still important and relevant to her ongoing character and story is smart. The ladies all run into Nadima and Jeremy. I do think that Nadima and Jeremy being together is a little weird, but it's very convenient. We want to tag in the work friends for a bit. I don't really see Nadima and Jeremy as people that hang out together typically. I mean, Nadima specifically said he's damaged goods. She's not interested in him because he's too old. Jeremy seems like a guy who, if he isn't self-aware enough to know that it's weird hanging out with undergrads, let alone graduate students, he should probably quickly bring himself to understand that. It just seems like it's very weird that they would be paired there, but like I said, it's convenient, so I'm going to let it go. We do have a moment here where Jeremy gets floaty hearts for Babs, and she completely fails to notice. We are going to do some stuff with love interests in this issue. Love interests who aren't Jeremy. So I just thought it was really interesting that we would keep in mind, just pay attention, readers. Jeremy has floaty hearts for Barbara. Before, Barbara had floaty hearts for Jeremy, and he didn't seem to care. Now, Jeremy has floaty hearts for Babs, and she doesn't seem to care. Will they? Won't they? We'll see. As we go into the gallery, Barbara is legitimately horrified by her alter ego as a sexualized subject of the photos. And in my opinion, that horror is completely legit. It is exactly the feeling she should have. Seeing this version of herself turned into this whole other. And I think that underneath this, we can read this for young women everywhere. What young woman hasn't looked at a magazine and seen an idealized version of themselves in one form or fashion, and then maybe felt weird about it or felt lessened by it? This is a thing that I hear from women all the time, that this has been their experience with fashion magazines or women's magazines in general. The reason that we get to make it so pointed for Barbara is that nobody else is Batgirl, at least for the purposes of this continuity. So to see a version of her own alter ego turned into that fashion plate, well, she says it herself, and I quote, "I feel so violated." Now, if you look around the gallery and actually read some of the descriptions of who Dagger Type is and what kind of art he does, they are cartoonishly pretentious. However, the actual photos seem very good. I mean, obviously they're not really photos, they're drawings of photos, but they're arty. People seem to be responding to them strongly. The photos are very good, if not great, even if the artist is kind of a pretentious douche nozzle. This is a little bit of foreshadowing for the rest of the book, so just keep your eye on that ball. In the meantime, Dinah finds these photos of a version of Batgirl hilarious. And let's be honest, from her perspective, it's hard to blame her, even if she's kind of overdoing a little bit. She gets to really dig in, not just laughing, but really get her digs in when Alicia says, "I don't know who's more narcissistic, the artist or the subject." It's a good opener for a Dinah joke, but also some pretty impressive foreshadowing of the big reveal at the end of this issue. Frankie sees a photo that she can't get enough of and wants Barbara to see it. It's one called Vulnerable, and it is a shadowy picture of Batgirl in a wheelchair. And of course, this is horrifying to Barbara. Batgirl in a wheelchair is a gut punch that she will not easily bounce back from. No less because it speaks to Frankie. Right? Frankie says in that moment, "This picture just really speaks to me. I bet it will you too, Barbara." Whereas for Frankie, it's seeing this very powerful image of womanhood in a vulnerable position that Frankie can understand, since she also has mobility troubles. For Barbara, it's too real and it's too intimate. And if you combine it with the threat to her secret identity and the doppelganger from the beginning of the issue, it is extra terrifying. Ethan says that he thought Dinah's reaction to the photos was particularly not charitable to Barbara. And I agree with you from certain versions of Black Canary. But this version of Black Canary that's a little too cool for school and a little too punk rock for Burnside, and right now kind of a little bit hates Barbara, she's going to get her licks in every which way she can. And let's be honest, this is kind of funny. I mean, until we get to Vulnerable. That's the trick, right? The rest of this, it's completely legitimate that people would make jokes at Barbara's expense about these photos until they get to Vulnerable. And then it's too real. It's too real for everybody. I don't think that that's accidental. I think that Dinah gets mean on purpose so that when we get to Vulnerable and we see everyone's reaction to that piece, we realize that that would be a bridge too far even for her. If you go to the page and look at the reaction of Barbara and Dinah to Vulnerable, Dinah's done joking. You can tell in that picture she is done joking. It's too much. It's too far. It would move from amusingly mean. It would move from I'm getting the better of a friend of mine with a little bit of an edge because we're at odds right now, and into a place where you're attacking your friend in that person's most vulnerable spot. And Dinah won't go there. From there, we stay in the gallery, but we move to later that night. The gallery owner is cynical as all get out and doesn't seem like much of an art lover, but she does like cashing checks, and maybe that has something to do with how incredibly pretentious Daggertype is. That this gallery owner is just going to count her lucky stars, that at least she's going to get rich as she deals with this difficult artist. But Batgirl steps out of the darkness and frightens her into giving her some information. This is that overlap with one Batman Too Many I mentioned. The gallery owner explains that Daggertype never delivers the pictures. He works anonymously. He only sends them via Omnicab. Which, once again, going back to the first session of the seminar, this is more of that building, that world building for the DCU with brands. This is the DCU Lyft or Uber. Of course there's a DC Universe Lyft or Uber, at least in Burnside, because Burnside is filled with people of an age where they have to have side hustles. And of course, it reminds us of the importance of new technology and new services in the modern economy, and it gives us an opportunity for Barbara to hack in and discover that there are only a handful of places that all of those works of art could be coming from. She narrows down the field. I'm going to digress from the story here for just a minute, and I'm going to ask you, my patrons and audience, a question about her hacking. Are we comfortable with Barbara hacking into Omnicab in order to hunt down this person? Has this person committed any crimes yet? Maybe if the artist Daggertype is the same person as the Batgirl doppelganger from the beginning of the issue, but I think at this point Barbara doesn't believe that. So right now, she is not really upholding the law or even a concept of justice. She is looking for somebody who knows too much about her. Now, that's very scary, and I'm not suggesting that she shouldn't be concerned about that. But with Barbara being a computer user extraordinaire, a hacker, even if she's typically of the white hat variety, how do we feel about the ethics of privacy here? Is Barbara taking a step too far, hacking into Omnicab, looking for an artist that she just wants to ask some very pointed questions to? It's not like there's a bunch of poison gas attached to a school that she's saving lives or something like that. No, I'll take a step back from there. The Bat family as a whole often uses what we would normally consider illegal or unethical information gathering detective methods that the police would be hard-pressed to put into play, at least not without a warrant. Technically speaking, private citizens cannot break my constitutional rights. They can break into my home, which is a crime, but they're not actors of the state, so they haven't broken my privacy. So from that perspective, Barbara's not stomping all over my right to privacy here if I'm an Omnicab user. I recognize that. But ethically, where does she stand? Is this too far? If not, where is too far? Or am I asking questions that are not appropriate for books about people dressed in Dracula drag punching murder clowns? Ethan asks, how many innocent but suspect people has Batman scared into giving him information? Here's the thing. Clearly, they are all vigilantes. And we are reading a story where vigilantism is, to one extent or another, an ultimate good. But I think we also have to take into account what the methods of their vigilantism say about them. Batman sees somebody that he thinks is... Actually, I don't even need to use Batman. Batgirl is suspicious of what's going on at this gallery, and she goes and she frightens the gallery owner into giving her information. I'm not saying that that is super fun or friendly of Batgirl, but I personally feel like that is on a lower level than hacking into a whole system that might have all kinds of other private information dialed into it. And one reason I bring this up, honestly, is because of where we are going to wind up by the end of this arc, here in a couple more issues. Some of these questions are going to come back. So I'm curious in the meantime. Have a conversation with me in Discord if you're a patron. If you are a listener, talk to me for the next week in #SHUBatgirl and tell me what you think about the ethics of Batgirl hacking into Omnicab. Is it too much? Is it not enough? Where's the line? From there, we transition to Daggertype's warehouse hideout. The scene transition is a Google Maps pin. I really like that touch. It's very clever. We know exactly what it means as soon as we see it. And it is thematically appropriate with the way that she discovered which warehouse was dagger types via hacking Omnicab. Batgirl does not find dagger type here, but she does find an American Sign Language book and realizes that there was a message in the photos. The callback to Alacia saying that there's no message in these photos is maybe a little bit much, but at the same time, it's clever enough I'm prepared to forgive it. Because the idea that this supervillain, this villainous person, would start sending messages to a Bat family person, I'm on board with that. I love the riddles. I love the jokes. I love booby-trapped umbrellas. I'm into that thing. It does make me ask some difficult questions, maybe, because now for the purposes of this seminar, I'm doing a close read of this story, and I'm wondering if maybe it's a little too convenient. I mean, what order were you supposed to read the photos in? Were the ones that Barbara was remembering in detective vision the only ones that were signs, so she could narrow the field down? I'm saying it's still very clever, but it does become a bit of what they call a refrigerator moment for me. It doesn't take me out of the story here, but it does later that evening when I'm rummaging around in the refrigerator. It makes me stand up and go, wait, how did she know which ones in what order? I don't know. Maybe I'm being too critical. What do you guys think? Because of those signs, we realize that dagger type is waiting for Batgirl at the bridge. We see that Barbara is texting Dinah asking for some backup, and Dinah is just ghosting her, which I think is pretty in character at this point for their relationship. Then Batgirl is attacked by some henchwomen who are wearing outfits that are sort of a combination of Bruce Lee and Enter the Dragon and maybe Black Canary or Robin? I'm not really exactly sure what they were going for there other than generic henchwoman. The fishnets made me think Black Canary, the domino mask makes me think Robin, the leotard makes me think Bruce Lee and Enter the Dragon. I don't know. What were they going for exactly? Maybe I'm looking for things where there isn't anything other than henchwoman. Re-enter the fake Batgirl. Her outfit has gone from bedazzled to literally dazzling, like head to toe. And then she makes it clear that we are going to hone in on that cult of fame thing. Because when Batgirl asks, what do you want? Her response is, what does anybody want? Fame, honey. Fame. And if you can't make it on your own, follow someone who's got it. Looking at that cult of fame thing, it's easy to see someone buying into that concept, even though it sounds ridiculous once you say it out loud. It's a thing that people do on social media and just don't think that hard about it. But this person has gone ahead and closed the loop, made the outfit, showed up in the places, said that they were Batgirl, etc. It's a good foundation for a villain when you take something that is pretty basic and makes at least a modicum of sense, and then you go supervillain step and you're like, oh yeah, that's just out of control. And I think that's where we're at right now. I think it's really interesting that Batgirl gets under the faker's skin with the remark about the airbrush. It's both catty in a believably feminine way while also a very typical Bat family tactic. Dick Grayson, as Robin, is the usual person who employs this tactic, who will say something mean or funny or cutting or biting about the villain or their style in order to make them angry and knock them off balance. So it's usually Robin, but let's be honest, Batman has done the same thing now and then, and here we see Batgirl doing it in a way that I think is really on point for the conversation between herself and her doppelganger. We also get what I think is one of the best Batgirl lines so far in this storyline. Clearly, you're not familiar with my MO. I don't do modeling shoots, I don't rob celebrity houses, and I don't lose fights. And it's in the middle of saying that Batgirl finishes taking out the henchies. Pretty great. Faker throws some insults back, but they're very forced, or at least they sound very forced to my ear. And the more that I thought about it, the more I considered that wasn't an accident. Saying things like vintage store hipster, or mangling cool person lines like, and like my mama used to say, if you can't take the heat, another Batgirl will kill you dead and take your place. It all just feels extremely forced. And I think it's supposed to, because we don't know who this fake Batgirl is yet, but we do know now that this fake Batgirl is connected to Dagger Type, and Dagger Type is nothing if not forced cool. All that said, I thought we were bat fighting is pretty good. That's pretty good. I'm pretty impressed with that one. Faker threatens to unmask Batgirl to reveal who she really is. This is another place with multiple meanings. Barbara totally misunderstands the threat and intent. Barbara thinks that Faker means she will unmask Barbara and show all of Burnside that Batgirl is really Barbara. We will see that that is not what Faker means at all. However, in this moment, Barbara unmasks Faker instead. And I really like this panel. Note the smug smirk on Barbara's face as she thinks she has completely one-upped the fake Batgirl. Here is where it's revealed that Dagger Type is the fake Batgirl. And we need to talk about this reveal. It has a very Psycho or Crying Game feel to it. It is not a great look. What I mean by that is it feels extremely trans-misogynistic, even if Dagger isn't trans or doesn't consider himself trans. Now, I'm going to put some links in the show notes of people who are more able to talk about this from a personal space or who have done much more research than I was prepared to do for this episode of the seminar. These are going to be articles that I think are very worth reading, especially if you look at this page and don't see any kind of problem there. But this reveal plays on the horror trope of a man dressed convincingly as a woman does psychotic things or dangerous things. The mussed hair and the streaming eye makeup are textbook visual cues for this trope. It's unnecessary, and considering all the time that we have spent talking about how much effort this creative team put into diversifying this book, and how much effort this creative team put into using a character from the previous run who is trans, and using her respectfully, it's just disappointing that they would go for this really easy, obvious, low-hanging fruit. And as you will see if you read some of the articles that I link, the creative team handled this in the best possible way that they could. They didn't defend themselves. They certainly didn't knee-jerk. They shut up, and they listened to some of these concerns. And then they apologized. And knowing what we know about this creative team, I believed them that this was a completely unintended consequence. This transmisogyny was not at all what they meant to get across. And that in the moment, they just went for the easy gag. And it turns out that this is a place where they really shouldn't have gone for the easy gag. Now, I'm also told that they changed the art and the dialogue for the hardcover, but that's not the version that I have, so I'm not sure. If any of you who are following along on this seminar did get the hardcover of Batgirl of Burnside, reach out to me on Twitter. Send me an email, pulpdictionpress@gmail.com. We can do a compare and contrast and see how they changed it, what they did to make this less awful. But I don't really think there's any way to avoid that when this book first came out, the uproar over these couple of pages, the people who were outraged were right to be outraged. And the creative team handled it very well. So, good on everybody involved. As far as the story is concerned, Batgirl is so shocked to discover that the fake Batgirl is Dagger Type that it gives Dagger Type the opportunity to pull a gun and fire. Batgirl has to throw herself backwards off the bridge and into the river in order to dodge the shot. In the process, she loses her cowl and Dagger Type gets away. However, Dagger Type, being the kind of person that he is, invites all of Burnside to a theater where he will reveal who Batgirl really is. And the invitation is spectacularly pretentious. You thought all the stuff Dagger Type wrote about himself at the gallery was pretentious. This straps that to a rocket and shows it just how high they can go into the pretentious sphere. It's pretty high. And I have to be honest with you, in similar way that I thought about Chiroptera as a big magnet for supervillainy, I couldn't help but imagine a theoretical Joker story where Joker is across the bridge in Gotham and hears about this thing and just decides to show up so that he can demonstrate to Dagger Type what real supervillain showmanship is, with predictably deadly results. I mean, it would be an incredibly dark story, but to have Barbara show up, ready to Batgirl it up, and instead find the Joker saying he just couldn't hang and walking away, it would be pretty cool. Or it would be terrible. I don't know. But it felt like it would be really fun. It would derail this story completely, but it felt like a fun thing that the Joker or Riddler might do if they caught wind of this thing. En route to the theater, Barbara hits up Kadir for a new cowl, but he can't 3D print it right now. Pause for a moment. 3D printing the cowl. Love it. It only makes sense. In fact, I'm pretty much convinced that that's how everybody's masks and outfits and stuff are being made in the Batcave. For the first time ever, I no longer have to wonder how Batman can buy his cowls in bulk. He doesn't have to. He can just print them right there in the cave. Take that, Christopher Nolan. Anyway, Kadir can't help Barbara out with a new cowl, and she decides to go in unmasked. Hopefully he won't see her coming. Finally on stage, Daggertype reveals himself as Batgirl. And I have to tell you, I love this outfit. It's like David Bowie meets Dr. Hurt. And for those of you who don't know who David Bowie is, shame on you, go listen to his music right now. And for those of you who don't know who Dr. Hurt is, believe me, you're going to love it when we get to him in the Batman seminar. Finally, we understand all the double meanings of his threats to Barbara. Daggertype is going to show everyone who Batgirl really is. And as far as he's concerned, he is really Batgirl. In his mind, he has supplanted her completely. He is the Batgirl who is making the concept of Batgirl into the bigger-than-life thing that it should be, not this person that's just stopping muggers. I appreciate very much where Daggertype is coming from. It's a good supervillain shtick, and it makes a lot of sense, but the crowd is immediately not having it. I've got quotes from the crowd that I really appreciated. Immediate response, identity theft? Really? Somebody else says, you can't just jack her style. And my personal favorite, what, you weren't famous enough? In a completely believable overreach, Daggertype refers to his work as, the artist is really the subject and the subject his brand. The use of the word brand is just a bridge too far. It's just a bit too self-aware. It's a bit too marketing instead of being hip. It completely loses the crowd. And really, it loses Barbara first. She is the vanguard of Daggertype completely losing the crowd. I believe she says something like, his brand? Really? In the crowd, somebody asks, why does everything cool turn out to be an ad? And I feel like this is the existential question of the 21st century. Assuming that we survive the existential question in front of at least my United States listeners right now, which is, will we even make it much further into the 21st century? But if the answer is yes to that, then why does everything cool turn out to be an ad is the question that we will ask ourselves well on through this century. The heckling brings the gun back out, and suddenly Daggertype is a mass shooter. You may recall from the last session how I mentioned that mass shooters are, to me, the biggest, worst example of this cult of fame. Somebody willing to do something mindlessly violent and destructive just to get their names into the mouths of newscasters and into hashtags and things. And here we see Daggertype, who had such delusions of grandeur, not just about himself as an artist, but about himself as Batgirl, reduced to being just another black trench coat firing into a crowd. Oh, how the supposedly mighty have fallen. Barbara, who still doesn't have her outfit, attacks him backstage and uses the super flash, thank you Kadir, and also gives another great line. Hey Daggertype, your outfit is kinda hard on the eyes. Flash, love it. And here in some conversation with Daggertype we have a reveal. Daggertype has a patron whose MO seems very similar to the Jawbreakers, and it's the patron who ordered the whole operation, especially the wheelchair photo. Again, there is someone out there pulling the strings on this, who is not just trying to destroy Batgirl, but is destroying Batgirl in ways that would mean something to Barbara Gordon. Enter Gotham's finest. Babs covers pretty well for her secret identity, and seems kind of cool doing it. Yeah, I was just here to see the show, kind of want my money back. Daggertype mentions Kanye West again. I neglected to mention it previously, but this is the second time that Daggertype mentions collaborating with Kanye. For those of you familiar with Kanye's public persona, the comparison is good. It makes sense. Barbara gets a little adorkable with Officer Liam Powell when he flirts with her. I love the panel with her lip bite. It's just so cute, and it totally shows what she's doing. She is interested in this guy and hopes he is interested in her. And now suddenly we have a whole new love interest. who also seems decently fraught. He's the right age. He is a Gotham City police officer, which means he's a solid citizen. But you have to feel like being GCPD and dating the commissioner's daughter might be a really dangerous space for Officer Powell to occupy. I'm excited to see where that goes. For my money, Officer Powell is a much more interesting and viable love interest than Jeremy is. So let's all cross our fingers that he hangs around for a little while. Finally, we return to the bridge, where Batgirl previously confronted Daggertype as fake Batgirl. Dinah is reluctantly agreeing to help, and I feel like as we go forward, this is a turning point in their relationship. They may not become besties again by the end of this arc, but you will start to see a thawing out between them, and that's pretty great. It makes sense. We've reached a point where no one can help Barbara with this thing except for Dinah, and the fact that Dinah, who was giving her such a hard time in such a mean way earlier in the issue, has agreed to help, it's a small moment, but I think it says something about them. However, Dinah is of course still too punk rock for this nonsense and hopes that Barbara gets 1 million likes or whatever. But here's the thing. This is pretty close to a selfie for Batgirl. It's not quite a selfie because she has a friend taking it, but the point of it is the same as a good selfie. Batgirl isn't taking this picture for the fame. She is controlling her own image online and in the world at large. She is owning herself. She is regrowing into herself again, I think. And this picture, where she shows herself as Batgirl in the way that she wants to be seen, is her taking her identity back in a way that you couldn't imagine her doing an issue or two ago when she was just trying to put the costume together. She even says, if Batgirl is going to be on every screen in Burnside, it's important that they see the real me. And this is the way I choose to be seen. This is particularly poignant if you know where this story is going. So keep in mind this declaration by Barbara as Batgirl as we go into the final 2 issues. She is taking control of something about her identity, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy victory. And so here we are at the end of this issue. It's been another slam-bang Batgirl story, right? We haven't really had as much of Barbara, except in as much as how Barbara factors into Batgirl. Although we did have some fun stuff with her friends and her various supporting casts, and not 1 but 2 love interests. So isn't it fascinating that Barbara was only herself on maybe 4 or 5 or at most 6 of these 22 pages, and I can still say that there didn't feel like there was that much Barbara, but at the same time, there's a lot of Barbara mixed into that. We also get some more of that great commentary on things like the cult of fame and what social media means to that. We talk a little bit about a world of marketing, or at least we comment on the fact that we now live in a world of marketing. Why does everything cool turn out to be an ad? We bring up and discuss and even make some good answers to all kinds of identity questions. Could Daggertype have become the real Batgirl? Maybe, in a certain sense, but not in the sense that Barbara chooses to be Batgirl. Which brings us around to Selfie Culture. The idea that by taking pictures of yourself and presenting yourself in the way that you want to be seen across a variety of platforms, and the fact that that is so potentially empowering for people. It's just not a thing that I can get over. I love to read articles about that. I love to have conversations with my friends that are really dialed into that kind of thing. And I love that this story, so aimed at the millennial demographic, is not just taking that concept head on, but it is showing both the positive and the negative sides. Just because it's not lecherous old dudes with paintbrushes painting young girls doesn't mean that selfie culture is perfect. There are some downsides, but look at how powerful you can feel taking your identity back and presenting it in the very specific way that you mean to. Tying that into your superhero identity basically blows the lid off for me. Questions of identity, who's the real person, the secret identity, the superhero or the civilian, how do those things mix? What kind of a person are you ethically when you lie to your friends and family about who you are so that you can go save lives? I love all of that stuff. And this issue of Batgirl, and this arc of Batgirl really, brings all of that front and center for me and puts it squarely on a person who is young enough to make some mistakes while she figures it out, but also self-aware and responsible enough to make good decisions overall in the end. And all of that in 22 issues of superhero comic. And that brings us to the end of the third session of Batgirl of Burnside. I hope that you have enjoyed this kind of heady talk about philosophies of identity. I am still very curious what you, my listeners, think about the ethics of hacking as far as Barbara and Batgirl are concerned. Did she go too far with Omnicab? Has she not gone far enough? Where would the line be? How does this compare with her breaking and entering into the gallery? All of that stuff. Please have a conversation with me on Twitter, #SHUBatgirl, or if you're a patron, hit me in the Discord. I would love to hear what you guys think about the ethics of hacking in 2017. It's kind of a big deal right now, right? And if any of you have big thoughts about selfie culture or about the cult of fame, I'd love to hear those as well. And for those of you who may not be buying into the transmisogyny of that scene, give the articles that I put in the show notes a read, and then come back and tell me if it changed your mind or if you think everybody overreacted. I really appreciate all of my patrons that were able to make the live stream of this, and I appreciate those of you who listen to the audio as a podcast. Thanks a lot for joining me in this session of the seminar, and I will see you next time for part 4 of Batgirl of Burnside. See ya. Superhero University is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. And if you can't support us financially, please leave the show a rating and review on iTunes. It's the best way to help others discover the show. Keep up with Pulp Diction news by following our host on Twitter @Joshua Unruh, or find us at facebook.com/pulpdictionproductions.